Today, Jews all around the world commemorate the single largest tragedy in our shared history, in which 6 million Jews were murdered. Many others barely survived the Nazis' attempt to eliminate what they called the Jewish problem. The Nazi regime carried out a lengthy process of dehumanization during which they prepared the ground and legitimized the killing of Jews just because they were Jews. The world was awoken too late, and the Jewish people were forever scared by the horrors of the Holocaust. This year, as we mark the 80th anniversary of the mass killing of Jews by the Nazis, we will remember that among the 6 million Jews that were murdered during those dark years, almost 2.5 million Jews, including 1.5 million Jews in Ukraine, were shot dead near their homes and were buried in death pits. The Babyn Yar massacre, the symbol of the Holocaust by bullets, saw 33,771 Jews of Kyiv, almost the city's entire Jewish population, shot to death in just 48 hours. Babyn Yar became the largest mass grave in Europe during the Holocaust.
Kyiv, a prolific center for Jewish education, culture, and political activity, abundant with important Jewish institutions and more than 230,000 Jewish citizens on the eve of the war. With the complete occupation of the city by the German forces, the Jewish population of Kyiv was soon forced to gather in the Babyn Yar ravines on the outskirts of the city. Headed by foot to Babyn Yar, the Jewish residents of Kyiv were soon forced to undress completely and dispose of their material possessions. Naked and afraid, they were beaten inhumanely and led by force into the ravine, forced to lie down on top of the corpses of other Jewish families who had already been shot. In the evening, the Germans buried their corpses under the thick layers of earth, while history buried the story of the once prolific Jewish population of Kyiv. This is the untold story of Babyn Yar, where an approximate number of 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children were cruelly and systematically shot dead by Nazi machine guns and handguns on the 29th and 30th of September, 1941, transforming the Babyn Yar massacre into one of the single largest instances of mass murder carried out during the Holocaust. In the following years of German occupation, Babyn Yar itself became a mass grave for the brutal extermination of Jews, POWs, Romani, Ukrainians, and others, reaching estimated numbers of around 100,000 lives. 4 decades after the war was over, the Soviet authorities had systematically erased the memory of the Babyn Yar massacre. To mask history, Babyn Yar was turned by the Soviets into a waste site. Today, in the independent state of Ukraine, and with the support of the President, the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center uncovers the facts, details, testimonials, and photo documentations, bringing to light an untold story of inhumanity and cruelness. A story that shall live in the memory of the millions that have died, so it shall never be forgotten, so it shall never be repeated.
This program is dedicated to discussing faith during the darkest time, observing how Jewish life and religious beliefs survived during this unimaginably difficult period. We will be joined today by Jewish leaders and rabbis from around the world. But the most meaningful event of this day in Ukraine and throughout the Jewish world is the inauguration of a new symbolic synagogue and prayer space at Babyn Yar, in the very same place where the Nazis tried not only to destroy the Jewish people, but also to destroy Jewish life, religion, and legacy. Here with us in the studio is Mr. Natan Sharansky, former prisoner of Zion and today chair of the supervisory board at the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. Mr. Sharansky, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you please describe your feelings on this most meaningful of days?
Look, I was born in Ukraine a few years after Holocaust, in 1948. And most of my Jewish friends had no grandfathers and grandmothers. We had very few uncles and aunts. And it was clear that some awful tragedy happened only a few years before we were born. And we were playing on the killing fields of Holocaust. You know, all these places, there was tens of thousands killed in each place. And we knew practically nothing. Because after this awful crime of Nazis, there was crime of Stalin, of communist regime, to erase memory, to erase it from the memory of the world and to erase our Jewish identity. And so when we start coming back through Zionism, through Israel, we start coming back to our history and to the tragedy of Holocaust, we fought Soviet authorities for our right that it will be part of our memory, of our history. So for me, this day is the day which reminds that these big tragedies and big triumphs of our people happened not only thousands of years ago, they are happening today. And this creating Babyn Yar memorial for me is like closing of the huge circle of bringing back the memory of the world, the memory of our people, our own memory, making it part of our history and our future.
Now, you are a person of faith. You have dealt with many challenges, among them imprisonment in the Soviet Union because of you being a Zionist activist. How did you keep your faith?
Well, you know, when I was lucky because I could compare the life without faith, without identity, without history, the life when the only value is the value of physical survival in spite of anti-Semitism. And then the life of free person, the life of the one who wants to continue this wandering with your people towards the land of Israel. And this feeling of that there are things which are much bigger than your career, that there are values and history and people and faith which make your life so much more rich. This feeling was so strong that when I was arrested, in fact, when they proposed me to take back my freedom and to or we will kill you or you'll become loyal Soviet citizen again, you knew that you don't want their life. You don't want the life of Soviet slave. And when they try to convince you that you are alone in this world, that everybody is scared to mention your name, you know that it's lie, because for a few years that you were activists, you were connected with the Jewish people, you discovered for yourself this power of our faith and power of our tradition and power of our people. And you feel that we, all the people of Israel, continue this struggle together with you, and your life is full. And you believe that exactly as we went out of Egypt, and exactly as we survived the tragedy of Holocaust and survived the efforts of those who wanted to take our memory from us, we will win again. That's how I felt.
Now, I know that you have always carried with you a copy of Psalms, Tehillim, in Hebrew, of course. Can I ask you to select a chapter that, in your view, reflects your feelings today?
Well, you know, this psalm book was sent to me by my wife from Israel a few days before I was arrested, with the note that she feels that the time has come to send to me. And I was not prepared to read such texts. There were many phrases which I didn't understand, many words. And when you're not taught how to understand, you don't know where the sentence finishes or where it begins. So in prison, I had to start reading, and you discover how much there is connected to our life and to our tragedies. And of course, now today, for me, it's very difficult to read it with such small letters. No doubt that Psalms Pei Gimel, what means 83, and Tzadik Dalet are the closest to this prediction of the arrows of the crime of Shoah. But let me read only a few words for this. Shir Mizmor L'Asaf, Elohim al domilach, al techarash val tishkot el, ki yinei oiveicha yechamayun v'misanecha nasurosh, alamcha yarimu sod, v'yityatzu al tzvonecha. Amru lechu v'nachidam migoy, v'lo yizacher Shem Yisrael od. Well, in fact, what is said here is that our enemies plan not only to kill all of us as a nation, and the other psalm they say every widow and every orphan, but the very memory of our people should be destroyed, and as they say also in the Psalm 94, that even God will forget us. Not only we will forget, we will be forgotten, but even God will abandon us. And on the other hand, in the same Psalms, you can see the hope. And of course, the first phrase, which I understood from all this ocean of the phrases, was from the Psalm 23, Gam ki elech bageit salmavet lo yirara ki ata imadi. And when you go through the valley of death, you should fear no evil. Because Saul, you are with me, you is God, you is King David, you is your wife, you is people of Israel, the state of Israel, all of them are coming to me to say, don't fear any evil. And that's that's the message, exactly what's happened with us. We were born in these fields of Holocaust, and we have to go back there again in order the memory will be restored. And exactly as in my dreams now today, I very often go back to the cell, go back to the interrogations. And then when they wake up, I'm encouraged, I feel our strength. That's when we go back to the Holocaust, we have to remind ourselves that our enemies disappeared like the smoke of the fire. But we are here, and when we are united around our values, around our state, around our people, we are never alone, and we will overcome all this.
Mr. Sharansky, thank you so much for your kind words. Of course, please stay with us as we will come back to you throughout this program. And now, the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, sent us a video message.
Холокост был беспрецедентным, исключительным проявлением ненависти, расизма и геноцида. Периодом в истории, когда человечество утратило свой моральный компас. История Бабина Яра, рассказанная миру ровно 80 лет спустя, показывает приверженность Украины к увековечению памяти о погибших. Мы помним и чтим память всех жертв Холокоста и делаем все, чтобы в Киеве наконец появился мемориал в Бабyn Яру, месте геноцида, ужасного преступления против человечества, где в 1941 году были расстреляны десятки тысяч.
Israel's ambassador to Ukraine, Mr. Yoel Leon, sent us a video message from Kyiv. Here it is.
Dear friends, we are gathering today online in order to inaugurate a very important place in Babyn Yar, a place of reflection, a place of prayer. You can call it a synagogue, you can call it a place of prayer. It is a place where people will come and think about the unthinkable. People will come here and look into themselves, asking, what would I have done if I would have been at the same place 80 years ago? Would I have done what was done here? Would I have tried to run away? Would I have cried? Would I have tried to save somebody? A lot of questions that we cannot answer because we weren't there. The only thing that we can do is to say never again and to do everything in our power in order that never again Jews will be killed because of their faith, because they are Jews, because they are part of the Jewish people. We have to do everything. We have to educate, we have to fight, we have to show that we are strong and we won't let any anti-Semitism come again in this world. In a week, we will celebrate the independence of the State of Israel, the rebirth of the Jewish state, the rebirth of the state of the Jewish nation. We have a strong army, thanks God. And this strong army, with the help of God, is here to show that never again a Jew will be killed wherever in the world because he is Jewish. We won't let it be done. So never again. It's not a slogan. Never again is to do something. And I'm calling again to the Ukrainian government to adopt the IRA definition on anti-Semitism in order to fight anti-Semitism in a better way. My dear friends, I can only hope that the synagogues that we see here in Babyn Yar today will be the symbol of peace forever.
Israel's two chief rabbis, Rabbi David Lau and Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef, sent us a video message. Let's take a look.
מכובדיי, יושב ראש הוועדה המייעצת מר נתן שרנסקי, אישי ציבור והקהל הקדוש שנאסף ביום מיוחד זה, ביום השואה, לציון חנוכת בית כנסת ובמעמד זיכרון לקדושי באבי יער, אלו שנרצחו, אותם 33,771 יהודים שנרצחו אך ורק בשל יהדותם. המעמד של חנוכת בית כנסת מרגש הוא. המעמד של הקמת בית כנסת, מקום בו יישמע קולם של יהודים שעומדים ומצדיקים עליהם את הדין, שעומדים וממשיכים את המורשת, הוא מעמד מיוחד במינו. כי ליד מקום שבו יתאר ויספר את הזוועות, את הקשיים, את הרצח הנורא שאירע שאנשים נרצחו אך ורק בשל היותם יהודים, והנה כאן מקום תפילה בא ואומר לכל אלו שסברו שלא ייזכר שם ישראל עוד, שלא יישמע עוד קולו של העם היהודי, הנה בית תפילה, מקום תפילה שבו יתכנסו יהודים וישמיעו הלאה המשך מורשת הדורות. ימשיכו וישמיעו הלאה את הקול הגדול, קולה של תפילה, קולו של העם היהודי, שלא יצליחו לפגוע בו ויזכירו לדורי דורות. אנחנו לא נסכים, לא נקבל את שנאת היהדות, לא נסכים ולא נקבל את מחיקת המשכיותה, אלא אדרבה, המשך מסורת הדורות. כל כך חשוב ויאה הדבר שאתם עושים זאת יחד עם זיכרון והנצחה למה שהיה, המשכיות ואמירה ברורה. עם ישראל חי, עם ישראל ימשיך את חייו, ימשיך את מורשתו, והשנאה היא זו שתיעלם מעל פני האדמה. ברוכים יהיו כל היוזמים וכל העושים למען המשך ההנצחה של הנרצחים ולמען המשך החיות של המסורת. ברכת שמיים תלווה את כולכם לעד.
חגיגת הקמת בית הכנסת זה דבר גדול להנציח את אלו שנהרגו, נרצחו בשואה האיומה. אין לך הצלחה יותר גדולה מזו להקים מקום של תפילה, מקום של תורה. הם, הנאצים, יימח שמם, הם פגעו בגופות, אבל ברוח הם לא פגעו. עם ישראל תמיד נשאר איתן ברוחו וחזק ברוחו עם התורה, עם המצוות, גם בתקופה של השואה האיומה, בשנות הזעם. גם אז היהודים מסרו את נפשם וקיימו תורה ומצוות מתוך מסירות נפש. קראנו כל מיני סיפורים עליהם, דברים מבהילים, איך הם קיימו מצה בליל הסדר, איך הם עפו מצות, איך הם קיימו כל החגים, כל השבתות, איך שהשתדלו ממש במסירות נפש. שנדע רשות המשחית לחבל, אינו מבחין בין צדיק ובין רשע. ואז לא הייתה הבחנה, היה שנות הזעם, חרון אף, ואז גם אנשים רגילים נפטרו, וגם נהרגו, וגם אנשים צדיקים וחסידים, אדמו"רים, חסידים, גם הם נהרגו. בעוונות הרבים היה לעם ישראל חורבן גדול מאוד. שליש מעם ישראל הרגו אותם הנאצים, החיות האלו, חיות טרפות. וחשוב להנציח את השואה. קמו היום כמה שוטים בעולם, ונקראים מכחישי השואה, השם ירחם. מה זה? דברים ברורים, צריך להנציח, כמה שאפשר להנציח בכל מקום ומקום את השואה האיומה, שלא יחזרו פעם שנייה על הדברים האלו. שיורידו את כל, עוד בהתחלה, עוד באיבו, שמתחיל ניצנים של איזה גזענות, אנטישמיות, לעצור את זה מיד, כי הוא יודע לאיפה זה מוביל האנטישמיות הזו. השם יעזר לנו ברוך השם, קיבץ ידחנו מאבק כפות הארץ, כולם באו לארץ ישראל. אף אחד לא חשב שאחרי 2000 שנות גלות, מאז חורבן בית המקדש, שיהיה פה בתים, ויהיה פה כבישים, וקשרים, וישיבות, בתי כנסיות, ואולפנות. אף אחד לא חשב שככה ייבנה ארץ ישראל. מה שלא היה מאז חורבן הבית השני. אז ברוך הוא רחם עלינו. אחרי השואה האיומה, אחרי הרצח של 6 מיליון יהודים בשואה, ברוך השם, הקימו, אבל עדיין אנחנו מחכים לגאולה השלמה. עדיין לא הגיע המשיח צדקנו. יש לנו סוף הגלות ברוך השם, אבל אנחנו מצפים, מייחלים לגאולה השלמה והאמיתית, שיבוא המשיח צדקנו, יבנה בית המקדש, יבוא הגאולה, כי להשם אלוהיך ומושל בגויים, ואז ידעו כל עמי העולם כי השם הוא אלוקים. יהי רצון שנזכה כולנו במהרה לגאולה שלמה, ואני מברך את כל היוזמים שבונים את בית הכנסת במקום הזה, דבר חשוב ונשגב לאין ארוך. יהי רצון שימשיכו עוד לפעול ולעשות, לחזק את הרוח של עם ישראל, שיברכו מפי ידו כל אשר יפנו, ישכילו ויצליחו, ונזכה לגאולה שלמה ביאת משיח צדקנו במהרה בימינו, אמן ואמן.
We are joined now by the Chief Rabbi of Kyiv and Ukraine, Yaakov Dov Bleich. Rabbi Bleich conducted a special prayer session today to honor the victims of the Holocaust at the new symbolic synagogue at Babyn Yar. Rabbi Bleich, how do you feel today to inaugurate a new symbolic synagogue on Yom HaShoah?
Let me tell you, obviously it's a tremendous feeling of first and foremost responsibility. The responsibility that we, our generation, has to the victims of the Shoah and also to the survivors. We are living in a generation where there are very few survivors that are around to tell the story. And the story must be told to the future generations. And we have to do whatever we can today to make sure that we put out there concrete memorials that will tell the story. The fact that this symbolic synagogue, this memorial was designed as a synagogue, is to show the connection of the Jewish people to, who are 3,333 years old, and our connection to previous generations, and how we continue to grow and to live on and really to develop. I always say that this spot was the spot that the Germans thought would create a Judenrein Kyiv. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we're able to create a memorial here that is symbolizes a synagogue, I think that shows the nitzachon, the victory, Pabieda, of the Jewish people over their oppressors.
Rabbi, during the Shoah, Jews kept their faith and traditions in spite of the horrors they have been. How do you explain that?
It's very interesting. I have been involved over the last number of years in a special project that discusses this issue of the faith. We call it through the lens of faith. And we made a special exhibit near Auschwitz, actually, to address this issue. interviewing dozens of survivors that survived the Holocaust and had them express how it was their faith helped them and allowed them to survive the horrors that they went through in the concentration camps and in general throughout the entire Shoah. And different people at different times throughout their suffering were able to plug in to their faith, to that reservoir of power, of energy that comes with faith, with understanding that you're part of a bigger picture, understanding that there's something going on here that we as individuals could never explain, understand, fight against, but only as a people, when we're together, when we're connected to our faith, when we're connected to God, then do we have the power and the strength and the energy to rebuild and to restart and to survive and to go through all of this suffering, which has no explanation to us, but it's only with faith that they were able to do it.
Have you been able to recover religious elements like ancient Torah scrolls, Tehillim, Tefillin, or other Jewish symbols from the Holocaust?
Benny, our synagogue in Kyiv, in Podol, the main synagogue, has over 70 Torah scrolls that survived World War II, survived the Holocaust. The actual building was used as a stable by the Germans, but after the war, I would say even in the middle of the war, when the Jews came back to Kyiv, in 1944, they already requested to rebuild that synagogue, and it was eventually rebuilt in 1945. And then Torah scrolls were gathered from different places in Kyiv and brought to the synagogue. So our synagogue in itself is a symbol of double survival. It was taken away by the communists in 1929 and shut down, and then it was used, as I said, by the Germans to desecrate it, and it was rebuilt in 1945, and that's where the seeds of Jewish survival in Kyiv and in Ukraine came from that synagogue. So all of the Jews that were there were all Holocaust survivors. Many of the Jewish artifacts there were artifacts that survived the war. Aside from that, there is also in Kyiv a very, very interesting collection, the greatest and most unique collections in the world, in the Museum of Historical Treasures of silver from synagogues. Very, very interesting. They have Torah crowns and Torah shields, and many, many valuable artifacts of Judaica that survived the war. And it was all taken by the Soviets. And then when in 1990, when Glasnost and Perestroika started happening, they took it all out of the cellars and they started to exhibit it.
Yeah.
There is also, by the way, in Kyiv is one of the greatest and largest collections of Jewish music from before the Holocaust. It's shared with the National Library in Israel, with many, many interesting things. In other words, Jewish life was very, very, very strong in Ukraine before war. During the communist times, obviously, many, many things were shut down. However, after World War II, as much as it was confined and it was really, really limited, but many, many of these artifacts and many things survived the communist regime.
Yeah. Rabbi Bleich, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very, very much for hosting us. And I am glad that the message of Babyn Yar is getting out to the world, the message of the Holocaust, and the message of our future and our hope, which, as we said, is symbolized with the symbolic synagogue and prayer space here in Kyiv today.
Rabbi Israel Meir Lau is a Holocaust survivor liberated at the age of 8. Rabbi Lau lost most of his family during the Holocaust. Rabbi Lau served as the chief rabbi of Israel between 1993 and 2003, and now serves as the chief rabbi of the city of Tel Aviv. Rabbi Lau is the chair of Yad Vashem and has dedicated his life to Holocaust Remembrance. We are grateful to Rabbi Lau for joining us as part of today's commemoration program. Sir, I want to start by asking you about faith during the Holocaust and afterwards. How did you personally keep your faith while enduring the horrors of the Holocaust?
האמת היא שזו שאלה קשה מאוד. אני לא דוגמה בכלל לנושא הזה, כי כשפרצה מלחמת העולם השנייה הייתי בן 2. כשנסתיימה ושוחררתי בבוכנוולד, לא מלאו לי עוד 8 שנים. אני הייתי בן 5.5 כשלקחו אותו לטרבלינקה, הוא היה רב של העיר בפולין. אני לא הדוגמה. לי לא היו הלבטים של אמונה בשואה, כי לא ידעתי על אמונה שום דבר. מה שחלמתי זה פת לחם, תפוח אדמה. זה היה הנושא שהטריד, ומשהו לחמם בו את הגוף ב-30-40 מעלות מתחת לאפס. בוכנוולד זה בוויימר, צפון מזרח גרמניה, קור אימים, ובאתי לשם בינואר. אלה היו הדאגות, אלה היו המחשבות. אבל אני יודע, יד ושם הוציא 6 כרכים רק על סיפורים אותנטיים, עדויות שנחקרו על גילויי אמונה בשואה. יש לי את זה פה. אני רק יודע בכמה עובדות מאנשים שעברו שם וחיו שם. זה יכול להתבטא בכך שבתור לאושוויץ, אולי זה אחד השיאים, בתור לתאי הגזים, ובכל זאת יש סלקציה. מנגלית כזאת. נשים וילדים עם תינוקות מצד אחד, גברים מצד אחר, שחלקם אולי יישארו לעבודה אם יצטרכו אותם. ובתור הזה, אנשים כבר רואים שאיש לא חוזר ממקום שהלכו אליו, זה תנורי גז. ואף אחד לא חוזר. ואז שומעים אישה יהודייה צעירה, שמחזיקה חבילה ביד עטופה בשמיכה, צועקת בכל כוחותיה. המוהל, 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 מוהל, מוהל. היא ילדה השבוע, בן, והיא מבינה שאנחנו עולים על המזבח, זה עקדת יצחק של המונים, של העם היהודי. כך היא תפסה את העניין. אז שהבן שלי יעלה על המזבח ויינתן כקורבן עולה, שיהיה מהול ולא ערל, שיהיה יהודי, ולא עם משהו אחר. אז היא בדקות האחרונות האלה זועקת, אולי בין הגברים שם יש מוהל. אז מה אנשים חושבים? מה הטריד אותם? או הלל לואי, אבא של פרנק לואי, למה הוא נהרג? כשהגיעו לאושוויץ, הוא יצא מהרכבת, והיו צריכים להסתדר בשלושות או רביעיות להסתדר, אבל הוא נזכר שעל קרקעית הקרון הוא השאיר את הטלית והתפילין. הוא הפר את ההוראה לעמוד דום, וטיפס אל הקרון, אין שם מדרגות, זה בקרונות של בהימות. להביא משם את הטלית והתפילין, הרגו אותו במכות על המקום. גילויים כאלה היו לאין ספור של יהודים מאמינים שלא הבינו אחרת.
Now, the Nazis destroyed hundreds of synagogues across Europe. Today, 80 years after, perhaps the most horrific massacre during the Holocaust at Babyn Yar, which saw almost the entire Jewish population of Kyiv shot and killed in just 48 hours, a new symbolic synagogue has been unveiled on Yom HaShoah, with special prayers such as the Kaddish memorial prayer recited. How this makes you feel?
זה יפה מאוד שחונכים בית כנסת. עצם הדבר שמדברים על הנצחה דרך בניין בית כנסת, הקמת בית כנסת, זה כבר דבר גדול. למה? הנאצים הם ידעו שכל עוד האמונה היהודית קיימת, ובעם היהודי אפילו במיעוטו היא עדיין בוערת בקרבו, העם היהודי לא יושמד. כי הרוח שומרת עליו, היא מייחדת אותו מכל העמים, והיא מגינה עליו. 10 חודשים לפני פרוץ מלחמת העולם השנייה, לפני ה-1 בספטמבר 39, ב-8 ו-9 באוקטובר 38, מה הם עשו? קריסטל נחת. הרסו את הקריסטלים של נברשות בתי הכנסת, והרסו באותו לילה, ברחבי גרמניה, 1,405 בתי כנסת, לא מאות, 1,400. 3,000 יהודים נרצחו באותו לילה. כאלה ששמרו בגופם על ספרי התורה שלא יחוללו ועל בתי הכנסת שלא יחרבו. ועוד 30,000 נשלחו למחנות ריכוז, כבר אז היה דכאו ובוכנוולד, כבר היו אז, לפני פרוץ המלחמה. אז הדבר הראשון הם הבינו, דבר ראשון, הרוח היהודית.
Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, headed by Natan Sharansky, is working in close cooperation with Yad Vashem, where you serve as the chair. It is clearly extremely important to tell the story of the Holocaust by bullets of the Jews shot and murdered in Eastern Europe. How do you see the fact that 80 years since the Holocaust, new memorials and educational institutions are actually being built?
קודם כל, אני מברך על כל דבר כזה. מתוך 6 מיליונים, לנו יש ביד ושם פחות מ5 מיליון שמות. נא לזכור שאנשים נהרגו ברחוב, בלי תיעוד, בלי שום רישום, שום דבר. היו עיירות שנאספו כולן, ולא היה מי שיספר. לא נותר אחד. היו עיירות שנשאר אחד, צייר כמו מוישה לברנשטיין, הוא היה היחידי שנשאר מהעיירה שלו. אבל היו עיירות שגם מוישה לברנשטיין אחד לא נשאר. מי יספר? איפה השמות? איפה הפרטים? אין לנו שום דבר. ולכן מפעם לפעם פתאום הלכנו, בני נוער של בני עקיבא ואחרים, לבתי עלמין בכל הארץ, להעתיק ולצלם מהמצבות של אנשים שנפטרו ונקברו פה בארץ ישראל, אבל אולי בשולי המצבה חרטו את שמם של קדושי שואה, קרוביו של הנפטר, ועוד שמות ועוד שמות. הלכו לבתי כנסת בכל הארץ ובכל העולם היהודי, ומן הפרוחות ומן המעילים של ספרי התורה, שם יש מזכרת נצח לזיכרון עולם, שמות של קדושי השם מקום דמם, צילמו את כל המצבות, וככה הגענו ל4,200,000. אחר כך ל4,700,000. פשוט שלא יישמט שמם מהזיכרון הלאומי. העובדה שזה, היום קמים מוזיאונים חדשים, העולם לא נרגע מהשואה מבחינה פשוטה. האנטישמיות כל כך גדולה, גואה וגוברת ברחבי תבל. הם מעוררים את הצורך להקים מוזיאונים כדי לספר מה פה היה.
And what is your message today to the Jewish world on Yom HaShoah, Rabbi?
אנחנו צריכים לעשות הכל כדי לקיים זכור ולא תשכח.
Rabbi Lau, thank you so much for joining us. Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center announced earlier this year its plans for constructing one of the world's largest Holocaust memorial centers. The museum complex will be built at Babyn Yar over an area of 150 hectares. It will include a dozen buildings in memory of the Jewish and non-Jewish victims of Babyn Yar massacre and the estimated 1.5 million Jews murdered in similar Nazi mass shootings across Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Ilya Kharzhanovsky, Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center Artistic Director, who is leading this mega project, joined us today. Sir, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
You decided that the first building, out of many, that will be built at the museum complex will be the symbolic synagogue. May I ask you why this was so important to you?
Because the story of the place, because 80,000 or 100,000, we don't know precise, or 120,000, how many people was killed there, but we definitely know that in the first 2 days was killed more than 34,000 people. And what we also know that after this massacre, another almost 80 years, there was almost nothing what can remind the people who coming there about this tragedy. There was no place where you can pray, where you can talk about something intimate and important about this killed, destroyed world. But because it's not the usual synagogue, it's symbolic place, it's art installation, and it's symbolic synagogue. It's a place which is open, which can show to people who coming there without knowing anything about Judaism, about Jewish life in Ukraine before the Second World War. It can show them something about this beautiful destroyed world, what they never have a chance to meet. From one hand, from the other hand, it's a place where every Jewish person can come and can pray and can feel and understand that this world, killed world, we cannot bring back the lives of people who was killed there, but we can trying to bring back the feeling, the emotions about love and respect to the memory of the victims.
And how do you feel about the fact that the opening of the synagogue takes place on Jewish Holocaust Memorial Day?
I think it's very symbolic, and it's absolutely it's very important for us. Pandemia changing our plans all the time, but I think this connection with Memorial Day, which especially important in Israel, this connection with the country, what these people who was killed there never saw, never get a chance to saw. I think it's very important and have another symbolic meaning. And I think the project like the symbolic synagogues, it's not just the usual building. It's also in a way it's coming, it's appear, and it's can be decided maybe somewhere else where it should stay and which day it can be open.
So you have said that building the museum complex within the territory of Babyn Yar itself, what you call the heart of this enormous tragedy, will be a place in which lost life will be remembered. How do you plan to convey this?
Through the very concrete stories of people and the families who was killed, everything what we can find. Through the objects like synagogue, or through the elements of life objects, also physical objects, artifacts, what we're trying to find overall in Ukraine. Important task that things which happened almost 80 years ago, especially for new generation, it should be not abstract things. It should be something what you can feel connected, yes. Where you can feel that it's about yourself. It's about your own family. It doesn't matter you're Jewish or not. And this kind of things you can do only if you just move the past to present.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kharzhanovsky. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Mr. Sharansky, how important it is that the president and the government of Ukraine are supporting this project? What is the message that it sends to Ukrainian citizens and to the world?
It's impossible to overestimate the importance of this fact. In fact, every nation in Europe which suffered from occupation and where Holocaust took place needs courage to face the past, because they were people who collaborated with Nazis. Of course, they were also people who were saving Jews. But in general, it's not simple. It's difficult. We see just in these days how difficult it is in Lithuania, how difficult it is in Poland, in many countries of Eastern Europe, and before. And even if we take France or the countries, it is not so easy to face, to look at these facts of Holocaust. So in Ukraine, where there was such a long history of Soviet Ukraine denying the past, and there was also a period of, let's say, not active involvement of the government in these problems. The fact that today we have the leaders of Ukraine who are fully committed, devoted, who believe that it is important not only for Jews, but for Ukrainians, for our mutual desire to live in the free world, that's very important. And on one hand, it's very important that this initiative will remain being initiative of individuals who are interested in the project. On the other hand, that we will have full cooperation with Ukrainian government. And we are grateful to the president, to his office, and of course to the mayor of Kyiv, who was a real pioneer in this.
Thank you, Mr. Shransky. Manuel Herz is a world-renowned architect based in Basel. His completed projects include the Synagogue of Mainz, an apartment building, Ballet Mécanique in Zurich, with moving facades, and a museum extension in Ashdod, Israel. His projects have won numerous international design awards, have been exhibited in museums worldwide, and acquired into the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, amongst others. Herz designed the symbolic synagogue as a pop-up book. This is what he wrote during the planning process. If we conceptualize the synagogue in its purest essence, we can consider it as a book during religious service. A congregation comes together to collectively read a book, the Siddur. The walls are decorated with prayers and blessings, celebrating reawakening, while the ceiling is painted with a myriad of symbols and iconography referencing the interior of synagogues of Ukraine from the 17th and 18th century that have since been destroyed. Manuel Herz, hello and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for welcoming me.
As we have just seen, this is a unique, remarkable, simple yet very complicated synagogue. I would like first to ask you, how did you approach this project? Was it different from other projects you have undertaken?
Of course it is, because it is such a significant ground that we are operating on. Few places on this planet have seen more death, more murder, more devastation as Babyn Yar. And it obliges me to approach this project with an incredible care and respect, to everything that happened in history. So, yes, it is incredibly meaningful, and I feel incredibly honored to be able to design the synagogue.
Did you feel that you are building on a sacred place which has seen the deaths of so many people? How did this affect you during the process?
Of course it is very, we have to be very careful as an architect to work on this ground, which is in a way almost sacred. So one of my first moves and thoughts was that we should barely touch the ground. We should not have foundations that dig into the ground. We should not disturb the ground. The second move, in a way, or the second thought was, I wanted to create a building that, on the one hand, of course, commemorates the incredibly devastating, tragic past, but also points to a new future, to bringing a living Jewry back to the site. And I wanted to do this in a way that is meaningful, significant, but can also open a new possible path, a new light, and maybe even a smile.
Can you share with us the artistic logic that led you to choose this unique concept that you offered?
Of course. I have worked on synagogues before, and even during my studies, I was very much engaged with the concept of what makes space in Judaism, the concept of space in Judaism, so particular. So I was incredibly happy to delve into that, into the task of the design of the Babyn Yar synagogue. As you already mentioned in your introduction, the book is maybe the main concept, the main thought that drives the design. But I thought when we read the Siddur together, when we read the Bible together in the synagogue, it opens up this kind of world of magic. It opens a world of morals, of histories. And this is something that I thought could be possible to express in architecture in almost a literal way. And I remembered these pop-up books, and at least when I see these pop-up books in, for example, museums, I cannot resist the temptation of opening them and discovering new worlds. And it is in exactly the same way that we feel in a synagogue during prayer. So I thought this is a fantastic metaphor in a way for the synagogue, and that's exactly what I did. A synagogue that opens up as a pop-up book, and that I think fascinates or will fascinate the visitors.
Now, Mr. Herz, if you could choose the message you want your creation to convey to the world, what would it be?
It would be a building that is very respectful to the past, that is very respectful to the site, to the location that has seen unbearable suffering, but that also creates a new beauty, that creates a beauty that we can enjoy together. And this kind of togetherness, which I think is at the core of the Jewish service, the religious service. We come together as a minyan, and we pray together as a minyan, is so important. And I think this is also a new ritual in a way that the building produces. We open the building together. It's a mechanic opening, and we really open it physically together. So this kind of togetherness, traveling into a new future that has a beauty, is the message that I wanted to convey with the building.
Mr. Herz, thank you so much for joining us today. And you know, thank you for creating this symbolic synagogue that will be a place for prayer and reflection. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
ישנו מרכיב חשוב בתפילה היהודית ובהוויית העם היהודי. אין בפן הדתי ואין בפן התרבותי, והוא הניגון. הניגון מלווה אותנו זה אלפי שנים, עוד מתקופת המשכן ובתי המקדש. במסורת השמיעו הלוויים שירי שבח והודיה לבורא, כחלק מתפילה ועבודת הקודש. הניגון השתרש גם בחסידויות והפך לחלק בלתי נפרד מההווי התרבותי. זה אותו הניגון שהעלה את חמתם של שונאי ישראל. הניגון שהפריד אותנו משאר העמים ומקהילות הסובבות, זה אותו הניגון של נפש יהודי הומייה, ושל אלי אלי שלא ייגמר לעולם. זה הניגון של ערב שבת סביב השולחן, וזהו הניגון של בתי הכנסת, בתי התפילה שנשרפו והושמדו באופן שיטתי על אדמת אירופה. ביום ארור אחד, בין השביעי לשמיני באפריל 1941, פסק הניגון שליווה את בני קהילת קייב. ביום הזה הובלו 33,771 יהודים אל גיא ההריגה בבאבי יאר, ונטבחו ביריות אחד. המוח החולני של הצורר הנאצי השתמש באין ספור מוטיבים בכדי לבלבל ולהשלות ולהסתיר את המעשים הנוראים. כשהם מובלים אל מותם, השמיעו הנאצים מוזיקה ושירים שבקעו מהרמקולים בקול גבוה, בכדי לעמם את רעש היריות בסוף המסלול. בתי התפילות של קהילת קייב הושמדו כליל. הניגון היהודי נדם, ואיתו גם פיותיהם של עשרות אלפי נשים, גברים וטף. היום, 80 שנה לתחילתה של שנאת הכדורים, הרצח ההמוני והשיטתי של יהדות אוקראינה, היום הזה מתעוררת מחדש. המוזיקה והניגון היהודי מתנגן. על האדמה ספוגת הדם בבאבי יאר, מקום בתי הכנסת שאת ניגוניו ושיריו ניסו שונאינו לעקור מן העולם. קולות התפילה שיעלו השמיימה מבית הכנסת באתר זה ימצאו דרכם אל נשמות עשרות אלפי היהודים הקבורים בקבר אחים. יחד יבקעו את שערי השמיים ויעידו כי את המנגינה של העם שלנו אי אפשר להפסיק.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sharansky, joining us today from the US, from New York and from Washington, D.C. are two Jewish leaders who have dedicated their lives to Holocaust remembrance and the education and to the fight against anti-Semitism. Mark Levine, Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of the National Coalition supporting Euro-Asian Jewry, and Dan Mariashin, Chief Executive Officer of Bnei Brit International. Thank you both for joining us today. Mr. Levine, as someone who has been involved in Jewish life and the rebirth of Jewish consciousness in Euro-Asian countries for about 40 years now, how do you view this event, seeing a new symbolic synagogue and prayer space and being built at the site of Europe's largest mass grave at Babyn Yar, Kyiv?
I'd like to echo some of what Natan was saying earlier. This was a very significant point in not just in Jewish history, but in the history of Ukraine and for the history of remembrance and for the continent of Europe as a whole. How many years did this massacre go unknown? And this is an opportunity today to bring the story of Babyn Yar, to bring the story of the tragedy of the murder by the hands of the Nazis in Ukraine and beyond to so many more people, particularly the younger generation. Studies have shown that as we get farther and farther from the end of World War II and from the end of the Holocaust, fewer people are aware of what took place. And this will be a wonderful opportunity to provide that sense of memory, that level of education to not just a new generation, but several generations of people who've been removed from this tragedy.
Yeah, Mr. Mariashin, as someone who spent all his adult life in the service of the Jewish people and now leads Bnei Brit organization, which cherishes and promotes human rights as well as Jewish causes, what message do you believe it sends to the world to see a symbolic synagogue and a prayer place being inaugurated by the state of Ukraine itself?
Well, such horrific crimes were committed on this site, and it is so important that there be a prayer space, a symbolic synagogue, in which to reflect on the utter tragedy that occurred on that site, the enormity of what happened there, and to think of the victims. Not only the victims at that particular site, but also to think more broadly of family members who may have perished in the Holocaust in other places, and to think about the Holocaust in general, to connect with the Jewish people. Having a synagogue space can certainly contribute to elevating one's spirituality at the point of such a terrible tragedy. So this is extremely important, in addition to everything else that will be in the center, to tell the story of the Holocaust, to tell the story of Babyn Yar, to teach about anti-Semitism. Having that space, that personal, spiritual space, and the symbolic synagogue is something which is a very, very important element in the entire picture of understanding exactly what happened on those terrible days 80 years ago.
Mr. Levin, your organization is deeply involved with Jewish communities in post-Soviet era countries and Ukraine in particular. Can I ask you to share a personal memory or story of how Jewish life and traditions survived during the Holocaust or other times of oppression, and how did it impact you?
I'd be happy to, and if you don't mind, I have two very brief stories. One involves my colleague's family. Most of her family perished during the Holocaust, like so many others, but one of her cousins survived Malhazan, and this touched me very much because it shows the strength and resiliency of our people. Every morning, before the guards would come and rouse the prisoners at the concentration camp, they would engage in morning prayers. And regardless of what was going on, they gathered and prayed together before the events of the day. But something that struck me, that even on Yom Kippur, they fasted. I mean, think about it. They were being starved to death anyway, or if they got rations, they were almost non-existent. Yet on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year for our people, they were insistent on continuing the tradition. The other is, my mother's side of the family, we had one survivor from the Holocaust, a cousin. He was actually a chaplain in the Polish army when he was captured by the Nazis, and he survived numerous camps. Yet every day he said he engaged in the daily prayer ritual, but more importantly, he tried to connect with his fellow prisoners. And when he finally was liberated at the end of World War II and made his way to the United States and reconnected with our family, he went on to become the principal of the largest day school in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. And again, I think this shows the resiliency and the strength and the conviction of our people and what we're willing to do. And it carried forth. I mean, you have one of the great heroes of modern Jewish history sitting across from you, and Natan and so many others who grew up under oppression during Soviet times set an example for all of us to move forward. We, of my generation, and I think Dan would agree with this, my generation questioned our parents and our grandparents about how could the Holocaust have happened? What could have been done that wasn't done? And how we weren't going to make that mistake again. And our brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union provided that opportunity to demonstrate that we were willing to put our words into action. But we couldn't have done it without the bravery of those activists in the Soviet Union. And what little we did in the sense compared to what they were willing to sacrifice, only made our sense of commitment that much stronger.
Yes. Mr. Mariashin, a recent poll across Europe, it was made, I think, the year before the pandemic, revealed that about a third of 7,000 European respondents across 7 countries knew just a little or nothing at all, and I quote, about the Holocaust. Now, as someone who is deeply involved in Holocaust education and remembrance initiatives, how worried are you about these types of findings, and what could be done to change this reality?
Well, we're deeply concerned. I mean, memory is literally slipping through our fingers here, day after day. There is a rise in Holocaust revisionism. There's a rise in Holocaust denial. You know, when I entered this field nearly 50 years ago, and I used to give speeches in the community, where I would give speeches on Holocaust Remembrance Day, I would always say, you know, there'll come a point when there'll be no one left with a tattoo on their arm or someone who has experienced this terrible barbarity to say, I was there, that I saw it, that I experienced it. And unfortunately, we're very close to approaching that particular moment. Now, one of the studies that you cite has a frightening result. And that is that amongst young people, millennials, Generation Zers, for example, in that particular study, 10% of those who were polled think that Jews themselves contributed to the Holocaust itself. Mm-hmm. So this is frightening. Whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the United States, wherever it is, we need to accelerate Holocaust education. We need to encourage field trips abroad once we get COVID behind us, to get young people out to Europe, to get them to come to the Babyn Yar Center, for example, and other sites throughout Europe, killing fields where Jews were victims. And we need to utilize, you know, we hear so much about social media on the negative side, but there is a positive side as well. And we need to utilize the internet and social media platforms to the fullest. In order to tell this story before it is too late. Yes. There's a tendency to, you know, say that history began yesterday. This is a problem with young people today and young adults today. And we have to work double time, overtime, to make sure that, as I say, memory does not slip through our fingers.
Yes. Mr. Sharansky, a poll conducted in Ukraine by the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center revealed that young people are less aware than others of what happened at Babyn Yar. I'm talking about 64%. And a greater percentage of these young people believe that the memory of genocide is fading as the living witnesses of those events pass away. So this shows, right, the importance of founding the memorial center, doesn't it?
Yes, of course. Look, first of all, what was found in Ukraine, it happens all over the world, as we just now heard. And I would say the fact that in Ukraine the young generation is forgetting it is less surprising, because after Holocaust there were 30 years of Soviet efforts to erase this memory. But yes, it is a very alarming fact. And the only way to deal with this is to remind to young generation that we are not only talking about physical killing of your great-grandfathers or your friends' great-grandfathers, but it's about the struggle which continues to happen. It's struggle to deprive us of our freedom, of our values, of our world where we can pursue for happiness. And that's how it happened. And that's how it happened then. And try to think, to go to the mind of the young people then. And that's first thing. And the second thing is to make it the way which will be interesting for young generation, which will use the methods, the internet world, all those things that exist today. And because that's how young generation is connected to the knowledge. And that's why this project is important, but it's important that it will be not only the history, the archives, which is extremely important, but it will be archives which will serve by today's means, to today's purpose, the aim of all of us to live in the world of freedom, in the world where people can live in accordance with their beliefs, with their values, and their desire to be happy.
Yeah. Going back to you, gentlemen, in the States, as anti-Semitism continues to grow, do you think the world had learned the lessons of the Holocaust, or is the slogan "never again" just empty words? What are the main steps Jewish leadership today should be focused on in the fight against growing racism and extremism? Let's start with you, Dan.
Okay, well, I think that, of course, we're deeply concerned. Again, with the passage of time, it's not only a matter of Holocaust remembrance, it's also about understanding who the Jewish people are. You know, one of the things that's lacking in public education, you know, now there's a lot to be being discussed here about the education about ethnic communities in the United States. We have contributed so much here in this country to the development of American democracy and American civilization, made so many contributions, not only here in the United States, but of course worldwide over a period of hundreds of years in so many fields, in medicine and in technology, in culture, and the list goes on, and many of us know that list. So the first thing is education about the Jewish people. We have to make sure that we don't only educate our own young people, but educate others as well about who we are. And then, until recently, we really had no baseline definition of what anti-Semitism was. We talked about contemporary anti-Semitism almost on an ad hoc basis. But since the last number of years, we've had from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance a baseline definition which deals with classic anti-Semitism that with all of the tropes that have come about over hundreds of years, as well as addressing contemporary anti-Semitism. You know, it's said that we have this perfect storm today. It comes from the left, anti-Semitism comes from the right, and it comes from Islamic extremists. And today, of course, so much anti-Semitism is rooted in or focuses on the demonization and delegitimization of Israel, the boycott of Israeli products, a boycott of academics, boycott of athletes. Natan Sharansky did pioneering work in focusing on this issue of demonization and delegitimization. So we have really our work cut out for us in terms of education, public education. The IRA definition, extremely important. More countries are adopting it. Athletic organizations are adopting it. The states here in the United States, very important to get the word out about what anti-Semitism actually is so it can be identified and that it can be countered.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mariashin. Mr. Levine?
Well, in addition to education, I would add accountability.
Yeah.
We have to hold those who engage in the promotion and the carrying out of anti-Semitism. We have to hold them to account, whether it's at an official or government level or at the popular or street level. We have to ensure that governments around the world have adequate laws on the books to deal with the issue of anti-Semitism, extremism, and ensure that those laws are actually are applied and enforced. And once they are applied and enforced, that those that are responsible are brought to justice. We have to hold our civil society institutions accountable. We've talked about education using social media, but let's not forget academia. We need to start educating at the youngest age, right through the university level. And we have to engage and integrate those people, and we call them influencers now. Whether it's from the cultural world, from the artistic community, and Dan has already mentioned athletes. This has to be an across-the-board effort. And that's why I'm so glad that over these last few years, I've had the opportunity to work with the successive Ukrainian governments and Ukrainian non-government leaders to try to move this project forward. I still remember sitting in my office here in Washington with the mayor of Kyiv, talking about his vision and his idea. And it hasn't taken that long to see this idea blossom. And I think combining these educational initiatives with holding people accountable we're never going to cure the disease of anti-Semitism, but we certainly can have the resources and tools to try to control it.
Yes. Mr. Levine, Mr. Mariashin, Mr. Sharansky, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Now I'd like to turn to images from today's ceremony conducted by Rabbi Bleich at the new symbolic synagogue inauguration. This ceremony was conducted under COVID restrictions as Ukraine and the world continue to grapple with the global pandemic. And now we are joined by Rabbi Idan Sher and Rabbi Aaron Fleisreich from Canada, who will both read from Tehillim. Rabbis, please.
It's an honor to be here, a solemn honor to be here to mark this most important and heavy emotional moment. I would like to share a thought from Tehillim Chav Gimel, from Psalm 23. In Psalm 23, we read in these famous well-known words, certainly well-known in Hebrew, but also very well-known in English as well, amongst Jews and by non-Jews. We read, Gam ki elech begeit tzalmavet, lo irara ki ata imadi. It's fascinating to note when you look at this verse, at this pasuk, that the person who wrote the Tehillim, that they didn't write that they were walking in a valley to death. And they didn't say that they were walking in a valley of death. They wrote very specifically that they're walking in a valley that is in the shadow of death. Most of us forget that we constantly live in the context of the frailty of life, of understanding how short and how gossamer life actually can be. But on these days, such as Yom HaShoah, remembering Babyn Yar, we are reminded time and time again of one of the most important but sad lessons to be learned from Jewish history. And that is, we are always in the shadow of death. And that the question that comes to us, since we are in that shadow, is what kind of life will we live? Will we live lives that are selfish and self-directed? Or as the psalmist at the Tehillim says, Ach tov v'chesed yudefuni kol yemei chayai, that we'll devote ourselves to love and kindness and goodness, or perhaps in a more modern context, by looking at what the Jews have become since the horror of the Shoah, is that we will become and have become people who are builders, that we don't seek vengeance or don't root ourselves in the horrors of the past. We remember, but we move forward. We live in order to build more. And so may this day inspire us, the memories of the people who were taken from us. May we remember how they lived, and may they inspire us to live better.
Thank you. Please, sir.
Thank you. It really is a great honor to be a part of today's ceremony. When early on in the Torah, early on in the Hebrew Bible, we read of Cain killing his brother Abel. And one of the first words that God speaks to Cain at that point is Kol demei achecha tzoakim alecha min ha'adama, that the voice of the blood of your brother is crying out from beneath the grounds. Abel's voice wanted to be heard. Abel's voice needed to be heard, that voice of kindness and goodness and truth and courage, and that voice of prayer. And Cain had silenced all of that. 80 years ago, the 34,000 voices of our brothers and sisters, voices of kindness, of goodness, of courage, of justice, and of prayer, were silenced at Babyn Yar. And they had been crying out. They want to be heard. They need to be heard. Our world needs to hear these voices. And today, as we take part in the dedication of a synagogue at that very spot, we, in the greatest testament to this concept of Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives, we once again bring life to those voices. We bring life to those voices of goodness and kindness and justice and truth. And in the synagogue, prayer as well. As we make good on the oath that God takes, that we read every single week in our synagogues. Ki v'shem kadshecha nishbata lo shelo yichbe neiro leolam va'ed. That God himself takes an oath that the flame of Israel will never be extinguished. Today we listen to those voices once again, and we honor the memory of the Kedoshim of Babyn Yar. At this point, I'd like to lead a chapter of Tehillim, chapter Kuf Lamed, chapter 130, that discusses voices coming from the depths, voices of courage, voices of faith. Shir hamalos mimamakim kerosicha Adonai, Adonai shima v'koli, tiena aznecha kashuvos lekol tachanunai, im avonos tishmarya, Adonai miyamod, Ki imecha hasalicha lema'an tivarei, ki visi Adonai ki v'sa nafshi v'lidvaro chalti, nafshi l'Adonai mishomrim laboker, shomrim laboker, Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, ki im Adonai hachesed v'harbe imo fidus, v'hu yiftes Yisrael mikol avonosav.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. To end this special commemoration program, we are joined by Cantor Shai Abramson, who will lead the El Maleh Rachamim prayer.
El Maleh Rachamim shochen bameromim Dayan almanot ואבי יתומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מרים ומזהירים לנשמות 6 מיליונים אחינו ואחיותינו, רבבות רבבות אלפי ישראל, אנשים, נשים וטף, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, שנחנקו, שנקברו חיים ושומתו בכל מיני מיתות משונות ואכזריות בידי הגרמנים הנאצים ועוזריהם, ושהלכו לעולמם על קידוש השם. בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, וייצור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו ושלום על משכבותם ונאמר אמן.
Thank you all for joining us today. Goodbye.